My name is Elalana Walker. There was a time I thought being a mom was the biggest blessing in my life, but today, it felt more like a deep wound that would never really heal. It started off like any regular visit. My son, James, my only child, showed up late. His shoulders were tense, and his mouth was tight, like he was already bracing for a fight. I had spent the whole morning cooking his favorite pot roast. I even used the fancy family dishes, set the table just how he liked it when he was a kid, picked up fresh rolls from the bakery. I wanted everything to feel warm, welcoming, but it didn't matter. He barely looked at the food, sat down with a loud sigh and started scrolling on his phone. I tried to make small talk. "So, how's work?" I asked with a smile I had to force. "Same," he muttered, eyes still glued to his screen. The silence between us felt thick, heavy. I tore a roll in half, just to keep my hands busy. "Then," I said gently, "I was thinking, maybe you could come by more often. The house feels so empty lately." He snorted. "Not my problem, Mom. You chose this." I blinked. "Chose what?" He finally set the phone down and looked at me like I was some dusty old thing taking up space. "You chose to stay here, stuck in the past, clinging to dead memories. I have a life. I don't owe you mine." I felt something swell in my throat, hurt, maybe, or disbelief. "I'm not asking for your life, James," I said softly. "Just a little time. You're my son." He shoved his chair back so hard, it screeched across the floor. "I didn't ask to be your emotional crutch," he snapped. "If you're so lonely, go find someone else to guilt." "I'm done." My heart pounded as I stood up. "James, please, don't do this. We're family." He was already halfway out the door. He threw his jacket on and turned back one last time. "You're dead to me," he said. And then, he was gone. I just stood there, staring at the door he'd slammed shut. His words cut through me sharper than any winter wind. Dead to him. I sat down slowly in the chair where I used to rock him to sleep, where I once kissed his forehead when he was sick, where I sang to him when he had nightmares. That chair now faced an empty one. The food sat untouched. The rolls were still warm when I set them out. Now they were cold and hard. The silence felt like it had teeth. It bit down hard, harder than any grief I've ever known. But after a while, after the hurt, the heartbreak, the disbelief, different feelings started to grow. Not anger, not sadness, something steadier, resolve. If I was dead to him, maybe it was time to bury the version of the future he thought I'd wait forever to live out. Maybe it was time to stop offering my love to someone who didn't know how to value it. Maybe it was time to give it to someone who would. I wiped my hands on a napkin, got up, walked down the hallway to my bedroom, opened the safe, the one where the original copy was kept. He thought a few cruel words could erase everything between us. He had no idea what he'd just lit inside me. The next morning, the house felt even heavier. I stayed in bed for a long time, staring up at the ceiling. No footsteps on the stairs, no clinking of dishes in the kitchen. Just the low hum of the heater fighting off the winter cold. When I finally got up, my bones ached. I shuffled into the kitchen. Yesterday's pot roast was still on the counter, now shriveled and dry. The rolls were rock hard. Everything felt still, cold, forgotten. But I wasn't, not yet. I couldn't bring myself to throw the food away. I just sat at the table, staring at it, as the memory of James's words played, again and again, in my head. "You're dead to me." Dead. But I was still here, still breathing, still hurting. Finally, I stood up and wrapped up the pot roast and rolls. I shoved them into the trash, then scrubbed the counters harder than I needed to. Like, maybe if I scrubbed hard enough, I could erase what he said. I wiped down everything, over and over, trying to stop my mind from spinning. My name is Elalana Walker. I'm 70 years old, a widow, a mother of one. I folded dish towels and stacked them neatly. No one would see or care, but I did it anyway. Little chores, small movements, they gave my hands something to do while my heart unraveled. The hallway walls were lined with pictures. James as a little boy in kindergarten, proudly holding up a turkey he painted with his fingers. James at 16, behind the wheel of his first car. James, in his cap and gown, smiling big with his college diploma in his hands. All that love, all those years, now reduced to silence and pain. My throat tightened as I ran my fingers along the edge of one photo frame. I had lost my husband, Richard, 2 winters ago. That pain cut deep. But losing James, losing him like this, while he was still alive, felt even worse. Like dying in tiny pieces. By the afternoon, I found myself on the living room floor, surrounded by old papers, legal documents, my will. After Richard died, I went to a lawyer and made James my only heir. Everything I had, my home, savings, jewelry, even our little cabin up north was supposed to go to him. It was all signed, sealed, and stored safely away. A promise. I picked up the document. It felt heavy, and so did the memory of who I was when I first signed it, hopeful, trusting, blind. My hand trembled as I set it back down. Deep in my heart, I knew the truth. James didn't see me as family anymore. To him, I was just a burden, something in his way, an inconvenience. Tears welled up, but I didn't let them fall. Crying wouldn't change anything. For the first time in years, I pulled out my old leather address book. The corners were worn, and the ink was fading. I flipped through the pages until I found a name I hadn't thought of in a long time. St. Mary's Home for Children. Miss Claudia Reyes, Director. I remembered dropping off some winter coats there once. I remembered the children smiling at me, like I was someone special. With shaking fingers, I dialed the number. My heart pounded. The phone rang once, twice. St. Mary's Home for Children, this is Claudia speaking. How can I help you? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. Then finally, I found the words. Hi, my name is Eleanor Walker. I think I'd like to make a donation. Claudia's voice was kind and calm. We set an appointment. Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Walker, she said warmly. We'd be honored to meet you. I hung up the phone and sat back. My chest felt tight, but not in the same way as before. This wasn't just about changing some paperwork. This was about rewriting the future, his and mine. The next morning, I bundled up in my coat and drove to St. Mary's. The building sat at the edge of town, with ivy crawling up the stone walls and a small playground in front. Kids in bright jackets ran around, laughing, their voices rising like bells in the cold air. Inside, the place was warm and cozy. It smelled like cookies, and it felt alive. Miss Reyes met me in the lobby. She was in her 50s, with sharp eyes, and a gentle smile. She offered me a cup of coffee, and I gladly took it, wrapping my hands around the mug for warmth. So, she said kindly, settling into her seat across from me, what brought you here? I paused. How do you tell a stranger your only child cut you out of his life, that everything you built your future around disappeared overnight? I want to make a donation, I said carefully. Something significant. She raised her eyebrows just a little, but nodded. For the children, yes, I said. For them, I want them to have a chance. A real one. Her face softened, and suddenly, this didn't feel like a transaction anymore. It felt like a lifeline. We spent the next hour going over ideas, scholarships, fixing parts of the building, starting new programs. The more we talked, the lighter I felt, like maybe, just maybe, my love wasn't wasted. It just needed a new place to grow. When I stood to leave, Claudia gently touched my hand. Thank you, Mrs. Walker. This will change lives. As I walked to my car, I looked up and saw a little girl standing by the window. Her tiny hand was pressed to the glass. She couldn't have been more than 6. Our eyes met, and she smiled wide and honest, like she saw something good in me. I smiled back, my throat tightening. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't in a long, long time. Hope. Back home, I didn't feel invisible anymore. I pulled out the drawer where I kept my papers and found my old will. I placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it like it was a living thing. James thought he could erase me from his life, but he didn't realize I could erase him from mine too. At the lawyer's office, the air smelled like leather and old paper, a warm, almost comforting contrast to how cold my own house had started to feel. Mr. Hendricks, my lawyer, slid the new documents across the desk. Are you sure about this, Mrs. Walker? He asked. I picked up the pen. My hand shook just a little, but my voice didn't. I'm sure. As I signed the papers, the scratch of ink across the page felt heavy, like closing a chapter, like a quiet ceremony. It was done. The house, the savings, the jewelry, the little cabin up north, it would all go to St. Mary's Home for Children. Not to James. Never to James. When I stepped outside, the winter sun was low in the sky. Shadows stretched across the pavement. I pulled my coat tighter around me and took a deep breath of the sharp, cold air. It was done. The next night, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. But something in me knew it was time to face this. Mom, James snapped on the other end, his voice sharp and angry. What the hell is this? I closed my eyes. What are you talking about, James? I got a call from Mr. Hendricks. You changed everything. His voice cracked, trying to hold back panic. You said you'd leave everything to me. You promised. I swallowed hard. Things change, James. People change. There was a pause. Then he exploded. You ungrateful after everything I've done for you. This is how you repay me. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was bitter, empty. Everything you've done for me. Like walking out when I needed you. Like telling me I was dead to you. You didn't mean it, he said quickly, his tone shifting to something softer, almost pleading. You're just upset. We can fix this. I'm not upset, James, I said, my voice calm now. I'm done. Then the line went quiet. Just like that, he was gone again. I set the phone down gently. My heart was racing, but my mind had never felt so clear. He had burned the bridge between us. All I did was make sure he couldn't cross back over it. It started with voicemails, long, rambling ones, some angry, some tearful. His voice twisted itself in circles, trying to undo the damage. You don't understand what you're doing, he said in one. You're giving away our family's legacy, he accused in another. Dad would be ashamed of you. And yes, the guilt came, like waves crashing in, but I stood firm. Richard, my husband, wouldn't have been ashamed. Richard loved deeply and openly. He would have understood. Then came the letters, pages and pages, all handwritten, full of apologies, memories, and big promises. He said he loved me, that he was confused, that family sticks together. But every letter felt like a knife wrapped in ribbon. One afternoon, my oldest friend, Martha Green, showed up with a plate of cookies and found me organizing the letters into a pile. Untouched. You don't have to read them, she said, settling into the armchair across from me. You owe him nothing, Elalana. I gave her a weak smile. I know, but knowing and feeling, that's a whole different battle. The final blow came when James showed up at my door. No phone call, no warning, just him standing there on the porch, looking smaller than I remembered. The wind tugged at his coat. Mom, he said, his voice trembling, please, can we talk? I hesitated. My hand gripped the doorframe. Once upon a time, I would have pulled him inside, made hot cocoa, wrapped him in everything warm I had left, but not this time. Instead, I stepped outside and gently closed the door behind me. I'm listening, I said, keeping space between us. His eyes searched mine, desperate. I made a mistake, he whispered. Please don't throw me away. I'm your son. My heart squeezed, but I kept my voice steady. You threw me away first, James. He reached out, but I stepped back. Goodbye, James. Then I turned, walked back inside, and locked the door behind me with a quiet but solid click. For the first time in a long, long while, I felt free. The days after James stood on my porch were quiet, not empty, just still, like a pond finally calming after a storm. I spent my mornings doing small things, watering my houseplants, knitting scarves I'd never finish, letting the sunlight warm my back as I read on the porch. No angry phone calls, no heavy apologies, just peace. I had already mourned the loss of my son long before he ever stood on my porch. But now, I was mourning something different. The life I thought we'd have, Sunday dinners, birthday parties, quiet moments growing old together. But mourning isn't the same as regret. I didn't regret choosing peace. One Saturday afternoon, I went back to St. Mary's. Ms. Reyes welcomed me with that same kind smile and led me inside. This way, she said, guiding me to the playroom. The sound of laughter hit me the moment we stepped in, bright and full of life. A group of kids were building a wobbly tower of blocks, cheering every time it looked like it might fall but didn't. I stood there smiling, just watching. Then one little girl caught my eye. Sophie, Ms. Reyes whispered. Without a second thought, Sophie ran straight toward me, arms stretched out wide. I crouched down just in time to catch her. She wrapped her tiny arms around my neck and giggled like we'd known each other forever. Hi, she chirped, grinning up at me. My throat tightened so much I couldn't speak. I just smiled and hugged her back, holding on a little longer than I meant to. Later, I sat on a worn couch watching the children play. Ms. Reyes brought me a cup of tea and sat beside me. You've done more than donate, she said gently. You've given them hope. I looked down into the tea, the steam curling up like a quiet sigh. Hope, that wasn't something you could wrap in ribbon, or write into a will. But somehow, it was here in every laugh, in every little voice, in every joyful moment. When I left that evening, Sophie stood on the steps, waving at me, her small figure glowing in the soft light of the setting sun. I waved back, feeling lighter than I had in years. At home, I hung up my coat, set down my purse, and looked at the wall of old photos. For a long time, those pictures only reminded me of what I had lost. But now, they reminded me of everything I had survived. I turned off the lights and climbed the stairs. The house settled around me like an old friend. Tomorrow would come another quiet, gentle day. And for the first time in a very long while, that didn't scare me. It comforted me. It filled me with peace. Real, steady, lasting peace. Spring came late that year. Winter held on longer than usual, but when it finally let go, it was beautiful. I opened the windows for the first time in months and let the fresh air sweep out the sadness. I filled every vase in the house with flowers, daffodils, tulips, little bursts of sunshine in every room. Life hadn't forgotten me. It had just waited for me to be ready again. On one bright afternoon, I returned to St. Mary's. Ms. Reyes greeted me with a warm hug. This time, no need for formal greetings anymore. "We started the library," she said proudly, "because of you." She led me down a hallway painted in soft, cheerful colors. The smell of new books filled the air. Inside the library, children sat on the carpet, reading, laughing, and trading opinions on which story was best. Then I saw Sophie. She spotted me from across the room and ran over, with a well-loved copy of Charlotte's Web in her hands. "Will you read with me?" she asked, her eyes wide with hope. I laughed, not a polite chuckle but a real, full laugh that seemed to shake the dust right out of my bones. "Of course," I said. I sat down on the floor beside her. As I read, her little head rested gently on my shoulder, and in that quiet moment, I understood something deeply. Family isn't something you're owed because of blood. Family is something you build through kindness, through love, by showing up when it matters. James had closed his door. But here, with these children, new doors were opening every day. When the sun began to dip and the kids headed off to dinner, Sophie hugged me again, toy this time, like she knew I needed it. As I walked to my car, I looked up at the sky. It stretched above me, open, endless, full of quiet promises. Tomorrow would come, and the day after that. And this time, I would be ready. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. Really, truly living. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was happy.